A very good morning to everyone. My name is Jenny Patricia Portilla Ruiz, and today it's a pleasure for me to be here to teach you about the communication process and the interpersonal communication. Well, in this lesson, I will be talking about interpersonal communication. In particular, I will be highlight the communication process in more depth. I will also be talking about important consideration when we communicate in terms of context, cultural values, and politeness. Remember, in intrapersonal communication, we focus on analyzing the way we deliver a message by thinking about how our receiver may interpret our message based on his or her experience, knowledge, and cultural values and cultural backgrounds. So, here in interpersonal communication, it can only happen if there are two or more people. This is one to give a message and one to receive and interpret a message. That is the basic communication process. Let's take a closer look at the communication process. There are 6 elements of interpersonal communication in this process. Starting with the sender. This person delivers the message. The message can be written or spoken or even expressed non-verbally through body language or facial expressions. The message can be ongoing or it can be one-off. The sender here can be referred to as the communicator. At the other end, the receiver receives the message and interprets the message. If the message received was one that was not necessarily intended to be, then miscommunication occurs. The message is the content that is sent. The channel linking between the receiver and the sender is the main spot where the message is sent. Some common channels are, for example, spoken message, which happen over the phone, radio, or television. The message can also be written in words via phone or the computer. Very importantly is the context. This is the setting of or environment in which the message is conveyed. The last element in this communication process is feedback. This is the response by the receiver to indicate whether he has successfully understood the message. Okay, so the 3 important considerations are, do you remember we said in terms of context, the formality of our communication setting determines how formal the way we present information to our receivers, and also how familiar we are with the receiver. In terms of cultural dimensions, we talk about power distance, individualism and collectivism, masculinity and femininity, and long and short-term orientation. And also, we briefly talk about the level of politeness that we need to consider to apply when we are communicating. So, now let's have a look at how can apply this in communication, in interpersonal communication, to illustrate to you the importance of context in communication. I'm going to show you an example of how communication can happen. Look at this diagram. The sender, who has in pink, asks the person in blue, who becomes the receiver of the message. Which way to the restroom? In this simple message, the sender assumes certain context. In this context, probably it would be an informal context because of the way the question is phrased, rather than being a little bit more indirect, like by saying, "Would you mind showing me the restroom is?" Or, "Would you mind telling me where the restroom is?" Or, "Could you please tell me where the restroom is?" The person simply says which way to the restroom. that is rather informal, so the person assumes that it is okay to praise it in an informal tone. Then the receiver, the person in blue, is also assumed to have the knowledge of where the restroom is. And not only that, the person in pink in sending a message is also assuming that the receiver, knowing where the restroom is also willing to share their information. So certain assumptions are made, and in this case, the person pink's assumption is met because the receiver then responds by sending "follow me" in this person in blue by giving feedback to the person in pink and saying "follow me." That suggests that the person in pink would want to follow, otherwise communication breakdown can occur at this point as well. So in this very simple dialogue, we can see that certain assumptions are made as we talk, so communication can easily be broken down if the person cannot decode the information correctly. On the top of that certain looks of facial expressions can also be misinterpreted. So these are other factors causing potential communication breakdowns as well. So you see, effective communication can only occur if the same message is successfully received and decoded by the potential receiver, and that appropriate feedback is given to the original sender of the message. Mention as that in the small power distance cultures, for example, there is less emphasis on the distance between those up the top and those down the bottom. And therefore, people can be more direct with each other, and power is used more equally. Meaning, just because you are on the top, it doesn't mean you have all the power. Therefore, people are more able to express their emotion and their opinions versus a large powered distance culture, which is more irrational, where people have to communicate more indirectly as there is more emphasis on those. On the distance between there's at the top and down the bottom. Therefore, people are less likely to be able to express their opinions and emotions freely. In the individualist cultures, we mentioned that people tend to focus more on self, and so there is less emphasis on communicating to giving other people praise. That means emphasizing on giving people positive image in our communication, and therefore, consequently, within those cultures, communities, people tend to maintain more distance with each other. But that means, in terms of communication, people can be more direct and are more free to express their own opinions. In contrast, on the collectivist cultures or communities or workplaces, people tend to focus more on their group. They are more concerned about giving people within the group face. That means emphasizing on giving people a positive image, making them feel good, being more polite. And so there is less distance with individuals within the community. People then in communication are likely to be more indirect, and they will express less individual opinion. Another factor that influences the way we communicate is cultural values and politeness. Using a right level of politeness is very important in communication, and what is considered to be polite varies across different cultures. So what do we mean by politeness? Essentially, in communication, we want to show that we are polite for two reasons. One is that we want to be liked, and we want to show other people that we want to be liked. And the other reason is that we want to show other people in our communication that we like them. We respect them and we show courtesy towards them in communication. So essentially, effective communication means you are able to achieve your goals through the delivery of your message while at the same time, and very importantly, that you show your listeners courtesy and respect. So very often politeness is associated with indirectness. So across some cultures, the more indirect you are in the way you communicate the message, the more polite you are considered to be. If this concept is not clear for you, let me give you an example to consider politeness within cultures. It's a small power distant culture where hierarchy is minimal. The indirectness may not be so necessary with those in power. In contrast, in a hierarchical society, it would be very important for a subordinate to show politeness. In other words, indirectness to for example, the employers, their superiors, those with more power. Take another example. In a culture which is collectivist oriented, it would be very important to show indirectness in communication. The reason is we want to show other people face. We want to show other people that through being indirect in our mail request or in our message in general, that we respect them and we want to give people a choice to not to commit to what want them to do. So indirectness is important in a collective or society as opposed to, as I mentioned before, in an individualist oriented society. It would as it would be less important to present our ideas in our messages more indirectly. So we would deliver our messages more directly because we don't need to be so concerned about giving other people face. We don't need to consider other people's feelings as much as we would in a collectivist oriented culture. Thank you for your attention. I hope you learn of this video. That's all for today. Bye bye.